Hey, welcome back, everybody. Last time we were talking about the history of Newark and leading up to the Newark riots in the summer of 1967. So I was trying to kind of paint the picture of how this city was an immigrant city, an industrial age city with many, 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 many factories. We can see on this chart here all these dots in Newark. Here's the Passaic River, right? So Route 21 is running down here. uh, all of those dots represent factories. So this was right around the turn of the century. There were so many jobs available in Newark that it attracted people both from around the world, all those different immigrant communities you saw in Newark, and then around the turn of the century, it started to attract a lot of African Americans from the South during the Great Migration. And today we see some of the remnants of these factories that once were. They were vibrant places that manufactured American goods. Things like tools and beer, various other things, pencils, were all manufactured here in Newark. And we stopped here the last time, the old Science High School, which now has a building on top of it. But this was once part of the Ballantine Brewery. And eventually it became a science research building for Rutgers, and then eventually a Newark Public Schools property that became Science High School. But this was another relic of the industrial age in this city. All right, so let's take stock of what we've looked at so far. We were looking at the factors that really transformed Newark, and of course, this was not unique to Newark. There are several other cities that went through this transformation after World War II. One of the main factors in these transformations is the existence of government loans. The real estate development that occurred between the 1930s and the 1970s primarily occurred for the purpose of suburbanization. There was not much invested in renovating existing buildings and roads and tunnels and schools and transportation infrastructure in these cities. So the cities that had been thriving and vibrant from the late 1800s, where all the factories were built, were now started to we're now starting to hollow out as most of the wealthy people moved out of those cities and government funding was actually supporting them moving to the suburbs. Couple this with the second factor of the Great Migration. As African Americans moved north from the failed post Civil War freedom in the South, from Jim Crow segregation and all the civil rights challenges they were facing in the South, they moved to American cities in the North like Chicago and like Newark, looking for these factory jobs. And this led to some shady real estate practices like blockbusting, where real estate agents would encourage white people to flee because of the newly incoming migrant families. So this all culminated with a massive white flight from inner cities into the suburbs. Mix this in with another ingredient we were talking about, that blacks faced massive discrimination when they came north. For example, very few of the labor unions that represented workers in Newark actually allowed black people. And black people faced difficulty in finding jobs. That was one of the main complaints around the time of the riots, was just there was discrimination in employment, and black people were not being hired for the work that was needed in the city of Newark. And of course, as is still the case today, there is a lot of discrimination in the policing. A mostly white police force. There was certainly a lot of organized crime in the white neighborhoods. There was mafia, there was mob, it was well known. Police kind of to look the other way for a lot of that kind of stuff, but heavily policed African Americans, and it was seen as discriminatory, it was unfair. And this all kind of culminated, it helped to culminate in the riots. Well, let's continue. Let's look at the fourth factor that we're going to examine here, and that would be the fact that factory jobs have been disappearing now for many decades. And certainly this is true of Newark. Between 1950 and 1960, 250 of these manufacturing firms left Newark. As more of the black people moved in, as more of the white people were moving out, the manufacturing firms were leaving Newark as well. Under JFK, there's a dollar for dollar tax credit system to build new plants and buy new equipment. So they're actually giving incentives to companies through federal tax policy. This isn't just people choosing to discriminate. That's one of the things a lot of people get twisted. It's not just a matter of choice. Government is incentivizing certain kinds of economic actions and disincentivizing others simultaneously. So under JFK, they're actually encouraging these plants to move and build in new places to relocate. So they're not renovating old plants. They're not providing those same jobs in cities like Newark and Cleveland. They're moving them elsewhere. So between 1960 and 1980, 1,300 more manufacturing firms leave Newark, and we can see the decline in the numbers of people that were actually employed in manufacturing. So over 30,000 people lost, and 10,000 jobs per decade lost, hemorrhaged out of this city. And between 1960 and 1980, New Jersey's six largest cities lose 20% of their total jobs. So that is certainly going to be a recipe for poverty and lack of funding in these cities for social services, among other things. Now, one of the last major factors I want to talk about today is transportation. The transportation system that starts after World War II drastically impacts Newark, New Jersey, and many other cities, but in particular Newark, New Jersey, which had been the shopping center. Newark in the 1940s and 50s was a shopping hub for New York City metro area. People would come to Newark to go to the Macy's store, to go to Weiss, to go to Bamberger's, to all these places at Broad and Market. It was a vibrant shopping center, but the transportation system changed that along with these other factors. So in 1921, the Federal Road Program was started, and it funds roads and highways heavily, but most of the local roads are still funded by towns, by our property taxes. So when there's a local pothole, it's predominantly the responsibility of the town and city to fix it. In 1920s, Ford and then GM were really pushing the individual automobile. By 1945, we were a car society. This was also coupled with the increase in the suburban lifestyle, so more and more people are driving their individual cars from a residence in the suburbs to a job, very often in the cities, and then returning home in their car later that day. This was not all just a matter of marketing and choosing on the part of American consumers, American businesses and consumers. First of all, the New Deal spent hundreds of millions of dollars funding automobile infrastructure and automobile manufacturing. It actually pumped money into providing jobs and plants and equipment for automobile manufacturing. It also pumped a lot of money into bridges and roads, things that were specifically designed for automobiles, not for mass transit, not for trains, not for buses, but predominantly for individual automobiles. Okay. Now, one of the more shady aspects of this is that places like General Motors and other families like the Rockefeller family and the Vanderbilt family were buying up trolley lines and buying up railways all over major cities in the United States throughout the early 1900s. And what they would do is they would actually shut those lines down. So they'd buy up a train line and put them out of business so that people were forced more and more to buy individual cars. And then culminating in the 1950s with the Interstate Highway Act. So President Eisenhower at the time pumped tons of money into building highways, interstate highways. The act authorized routing highways through urban centers, often creating a kind of isolation effect on various wards. We're going to talk about that in a second. But in particular in Newark, you can see it. The city is totally segregated by its highways. So we'll look at how the wards are actually divided by the highway system. But there's some shady stuff going on. Francis DuPont owns a lot of money in GM stock, and he's the Secretary of Transportation that's pushing this interstate highway system that's going to make his stock more valuable. You find a lot of that stuff in the history of government. But between 1955 and 1970, the federal government spends $100 billion on interstate highways. Now, part of this was actually in the context of the Cold War. We wanted to have highways that we could move people out of cities on in very, very fast speeds in case of the threat of a nuclear attack. So that's part of the issue with the interstate highways. It also gives the federal government a lot of control over the states because anytime they want a state to do something, they can now just say, hey, well, we're not going to give you any money for your interstate highways until you change your drinking age to 21 or until you pass Megan's Law or something like that. Anyway, we can see that most of the money is going for highways between 1945 and 1960. None of the money is going to urban mass transit. So where we had this opportunity to build up our cities and make them more vibrant and give people transportation, America chose instead to design its economy to be a suburban, individual car-owning kind of economy. Now, here we can see the interstate highways. They're the ones in blue and red. Up here you have Route 80, but more for our purposes, we're looking at the city of Newark, and you can see that Route 280 runs right through the city of Newark. Route 280 essentially divides the Central Ward from the North Ward. So here's the North Ward with Branchbrook Park, and all the old Italian neighborhoods. The Central Ward was where most of the African Americans lived. You can see with Route 78, it divides the Central Ward from the South Ward. The South Ward is where predominantly the Jewish community lived. You can see here the Garden State Parkway divides the Central Ward, again, where most of the black people live, from the West Ward, where most of the Irish people lived and the old German population was. So these highways were put in there on purpose. And then, of course, Route 21 basically comes down the center of Newark and divides the Central Ward from the East Ward. The highways literally segregate the city and kept most of the black people who lived in the brick towers in the Central Ward. You can see it here as well. Here's Route 280 running right through Newark. Okay, and you can see that I-95 runs along the edge of Newark by the highway, by the airport here, by 1 and 9. But 78 divides the Central Ward from the South Ward. 21 here divides the Central Ward from the East Ward. 280, and then here's Garden State Parkway dividing the Central Ward from the West Ward. So you can see by 1950 there was a massive network of federal highways. And by 1987, you have the interstate highway system that now is all across the entire country. So this was built up in that time to facilitate automobile travel. So whereas we had the opportunity to build up mass transit in our cities, we instead invested in cars and that kind of lifestyle. With that came the shopping mall. The rise of the shopping mall drew shoppers out of places like Newark and into suburban places, and this actually took a lot of jobs out of Newark. It took a lot of the sales base out of Newark. So this was also facilitated by the growth of highways and cars. The cities in New Jersey will lose their economic base as shopping centers, and those shopping centers will move to suburban locations. Now, one of the last factors I'm going to talk about is slum clearance. Now, there are several examples of these brick towers where many African American people lived, like the Stella Wright homes, like the Columbus homes. During the 1940s and 50s, the Housing Acts of 1949-1954 provided federal money for urban renewal. But what that eventually translated to was actually tearing down a lot of the tenement housing where most of the poor black people lived. And we can see that while this funding was happening, okay, so between the 40s and 50s and the 50s and 60s, when they're funding urban renewal, most of the people are going to the suburbs. The rate of growth in the suburbs is amazing at this point in history. So the cities start losing their tax bases. The most valuable homes and businesses are now losing their value or leaving. The cities are becoming blacker as African Americans move into these areas from where white people were moving, like the North Ward, like the South Ward, like the West Ward. Unemployment rises as the manufacturing jobs leave. And all the while, the schools are getting tougher. They're getting hard. They're getting harder to maintain. The tax revenues are declining. There are students that are impoverished, that have lower skill levels, that are coming into these schools. So the schooling is getting more difficult. At the same time, they're losing their tax base. They're losing their revenue for actually funding the schools. So as the housing stock deteriorates further, it just creates a vicious cycle. And crime begins to worsen as poverty worsens, which leads to more crime, which leads to more poverty and lack of investment. So this is a consistent kind of recipe, and we still see the conflict persist to this day. There's still mistrust between police and black residents of the city. And just look at the school funding formula. You can see that in 1977, when the Abbott decision was brought before the New Jersey Supreme Court asking for equitable schooling, what's going on is that the suburbs have a lower tax rate, and New Jersey in general has a lower tax rate than the cities, which has almost double the tax rate. But because the property values are so different, the suburbs have more money. So they're spending more on their students, even though they have lower taxes. So this has created a real strain on the cities. And it's all of these kind of economic declines, these factors of discrimination and the lack of opportunity that culminated in the anger at the police and that recipe that was mixed together in that pot that blew up in the summer of the late 60s. All right, so if you guys have any questions, please leave them. I'll leave the question for you to respond to on Edmodo. Check it out there. Have a good night, everybody.